Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the first live panel discussion of the Data Centers Ireland Virtual Festival. My name is Hugh Robinson, and I'm the Exhibition Director for Data Centers Ireland, which, due to the pandemic, cannot physically be held this year. The Data Centers Ireland Virtual Festival consists of 10 live panel discussions, 2 per day over the course of this week, featuring industry leaders and experts discussing key areas affecting data centers both in Ireland and internationally. As well as live panel discussions, the festival also has a range of on-demand content which can be accessed through the Data Centers Ireland website. This keynote webinar is entitled 2030 Net Zero, the Role of the Data Center, and is organised in conjunction with Hosting Ireland. I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their support. If you would like to ask any questions, please put these in the chat box and they shall be addressed at the end of the discussion. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the Data Centers Ireland website as further on-demand content. Moderator for this morning's panel discussion is Owen Lampkin, co-founder of Circular Data Solutions Limited. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Owen. Owen.
Good morning, thanks Hugh, and welcome everyone out there in internet land, coming to you from hopefully a server situated not far from you. So this morning's topic is 2030 Net Zero, the role of data centers. Well, what does this actually mean in reality to a data center operator, their customers, and also the wider general public? We've gathered today a really great panel. I would say that, but I can attest for all of them. And so without further ado, maybe Astrid, would you like to introduce yourself and your company, and we'll go around the table.
Hello, my name's Astrid Wynne, and I'm Sustainability Lead for TechBuyer, which is a refurbishment specialist for data center IT hardware. I'm also the chair of the Data Center Alliance Special Interest Group on Sustainability.
Matt.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Matthew Pullen. I'm the Managing Director of Sierra.
And Seamus.
Hi, my name is Seamus Dunn. I'm the Managing Director for Interaction, a digital realty company in Ireland, which is a data center provider. I was formerly the head of a division of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and lived in Houston, Texas.
And last but not least, Mr. Connolly.
Yes, Gary Connolly, founder of Hosts in Ireland, a collector of great people, great companies, and I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Well, look, Gary, I'd like maybe if you'd like to get the discussion going here this morning. You're privileged to be able to speak to the whole supply chain of data centers, the operators, from the builders to the people who kit the data centers out, and to the energy companies that supply all the photons to run these data centers. There's still a lot of myths around how data centers are operated, who operates them, and the impact on the environment of data centers. And I'd like, because the topic is where are we going to be in 2030, what are some of your thoughts on the challenges and aspirations of the industry?
Well, thank you, Owen, and thank you, Hugh and Kirsten, for creating the platform this morning. It's great. It's the best of what we can do at this moment in time. But Owen, really, before we get into the meat of it, what I wanted to try and do was really to give thanks, actually. I think we're entering the time of year, in this extraordinary year, where we should be giving thanks. And there have been so many front lines this year, right? And starting with the healthcare workers and the supporting emergency services that have been trying this year to inform us and keep us safe, and then for the less fortunate of us who find themselves in hospital, getting them back up on their feet and back out into society. We've also to give thanks to the scientific community You know, those people who are working behind the scenes trying to find a vaccine that will allow us to have a very different experience in 2021 than what we've had in 2020. But for the purpose of this discussion, I think it nicely leads into what we're going to be talking about here this morning. I'd also like to give great thanks to the digital front line. The digital front line that was identified in Q1, Q2 globally, and Ireland is no different, as essential workers. You know, because ultimately when we look now back at the last 6 to 8 months, you know, if there is any form of normal, it was created by the fact that we had tools at our disposal, infrastructure and data at our disposal that allowed us to continue on with our children in schooling. And subsequently now we've got our universities open due to the infrastructure. We were able to connect with our loved ones, right? We were involved even in Hosting Ireland in trying to provide tools and services to those in healthcare facilities, in the nursing home facilities, to connect ourselves with loved ones, all via data, all via technology. And then obviously the working from anywhere concept. I was having a laugh with some of the panelists on Friday that 15 years ago, we all would have had modems. The sound of a modem in our ears would have been just ringing every 5 minutes, because that would have been the option for connecting to any form of norm. And obviously then over the weekend, my own wife binged on, what was it, the thing about Princess Diana, The Crown? So, I mean, that whole infrastructure is all because of data. It's all because of the infrastructure that these essential workers are doing. So I'm really, really looking forward to this chat, particularly as we've got people on this panel that work in the industry. Oh, and I work on the industry. I don't work in it. We've got great people that work in it here. We've got Matt, we've got Seamus, you know, we've Astrid. They work in the industry. They're real people that were designing and building and operating data centers and the data 15 years ago. These centers haven't dropped out of the sky. It's just the evolution of data from a floppy disk, or in my case, a punch card. So I'm really, really looking forward to this discussion when we talk more about data as the tool in our arsenal to fight the most important next wave, which is climate. So data is the essence of what I hope this discussion will be about. And we talk a lot then about how we keep the rain off the data, which is centers and its supporting infrastructure. So thanks again. Really looking forward to the discussion. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Owen.
Well, brilliant, because that neatly sort of leads on. Good segue to a question I've got actually for Seamus. And Seamus, you said something to us a week or so ago, which intrigued me. You said, should we still call them data centers? Because isn't it really, they're just platforms for hosting services? And that is a very different way of looking at it, because I think Joe Public still look at data centers as huge sheds, burning lots of energy, employing 3 people walking around for nighttime security, and that's it. So could you expand on your thought there on renaming data centers?
Yeah, this topic is dear to my heart. I've worked up until last summer in the IT industry. So if somebody said, what do you work at? I'd say, well, I work in the IT industry, the information technology industry. And I'm of an age when my kids are hitting college. And, you know, I remember the growth of the internet. I remember something a lot of people maybe listening don't remember, Y2K.
I've got the scars.
So where we're at today with information technology and what it can do for you is incredible. And I only have to talk to my college going and school going kids to realize just how far it's come when you look back. And when people ask me today, what do you work in? I still say I work in the information technology industry. You know, that's because I do, you know, and they say, well, what do you do in work? And I said, well, I help businesses survive and thrive and compete and win and deliver digital services or use digital technology to stay in business, grow, build your customer services, compete, survive, and thrive. Now that's my job. That's actually what I do. And we're in 2020 now. Not even 2030, but by 2025, if you don't, as a business, embrace digital technology and what it brings, you'll be out of business by the end of this decade. Like that's just reality. If you're a bank, less and less people go into the bank. It's not common. My kids don't. They use Revolut or N26 or something. So my job is all about, helping businesses use digital technology to run their business, reduce cost structure for them so they can survive, speed up, be faster, be more agile, and that's all through digital technology. And then I've joined this particular subsegment of the IT industry because I do believe that they're centers of data. Where that information goes, all flows through the data center as we know it now, where the servers, networking, and storage devices are connected to your business, to your customers, to your partners, to your employees, and it's done at a global scale. So that's essentially what I view my job as being, and how the world is going to evolve. And if I think about things, think about electric cars. The leader there is Tesla. Tesla is essentially an IoT, an Internet of Things platform. I mean, it's really what it is. Data is constantly coming from the car to, centers of data and flowing out for useful information. Think about Zoom, and what that does. Think about life sciences, digital transformation for developing vaccines, for example, requires big data analytics to go fast and artificial intelligence. The other thing that's going to change is manufacturing will become distribute digitally, manufacture locally, instead of manufacture somewhere and then ship it all over the world. So it'll be just in time, and it'll use 3D printing. That's and the data for that 3D printing supply chain will be centers of data, where there's connectivity and interconnectivity. So, that's what digital technology and digital transformation is all about. And centers of data are essential for that to work and flow. The question about, centers of data and connectivity, what the other part of it from a sustainability point of view, we just got to figure out not whether to do all those things or not, but how to do them efficiently and sustainably, right? That's the topic of this net zero. We got to do this. I mean, people argued back in Ireland, in rural Ireland, should we bring electrification and all those high power cables around the country? Well, I don't think people question. I mean, that's something that needed to happen. It was progress. Well, digital transformation is progress too. So it's not a question of will you or won't you. It's a question of how to do it in the most environmentally friendly and the most sustainable way. We'll get into it. I'll let somebody else speak in a moment, but that's all about efficiency and, green energy. So let's bring on the green energy. And Ireland, if David Connolly from Wind Energy Ireland was here, he'd speak very strongly about just the potential to develop that. And, I really hope that's accelerated.
Well, that's Matt, if I can bring you in here, because going on from what Seamus is saying it's essentially talking about all these services that you can't see. The people are operating them. It's not like a bus turning up, you get on it and you get to work. But all these platforms enable people to work. How are you, as a global data center operator, how do you tie this all in with your customers, with your suppliers, to get to 2030 where you're hopefully net neutral, zero? What are how does that all come together?
But by the way, I just want to endorse what Seamus said, and sorry, I will answer the question, but just one point I wanted to make right at the beginning of this, because it goes to the heart of the the agenda for today's session is that, DCs are fundamental in delivering the EU's Circular Economy Action Plan and transition to zero carbon, all because at the end of the day, the circular economy is driven by research, innovation, digitization and digital technologies. So, just underscoring always the relevance. But how do we draw it in? Well, we've got three prongs to our mission. We've stated we'll be carbon neutral by 2040. The three prongs are that we're trying to build data centers that are compatible with a sustainable future. Big focus in our second prong on conserving water and energy through efficient design, maintenance and ops. But the third prong really goes to your point, which is we aspire to be strategic partners for sustainability with our customers to move their goals forward. We're dealing, certainly as it relates to the cloud companies, some of the organizations with the most aggressive sustainability programs. And, how we're getting there, goes from the tactical around what I've said, using heat less to cool, using cooling right place, right time. And in the case of some of our customers, we're doing things like piloting, basically ensuring that there's a zero waste strategy at every facility in which they operate. But I'll come back to some of the things Seamus said, which is that the challenge we all have is that, data centers are powering the future. They're fantastic things. But data centers have to chase GDP because light travels at the speed of light. Data centers have to be in urban and suburban locations in the key cities around the world. And therefore we have our challenges in lots of ways due to the differing environments that we have to be in. It's no use thinking that data centers can be in the Nordics because there's hydroelectric, in the Baltics because there's wind, and in Southern Europe just because there's solar. We have to be everywhere. And that means that we have to adopt differing strategies depending on where we are and what we're dealing with.
So, Astrid, you're at the exit end of data center operations. Your business is how do you repurpose the huge amount of infrastructure that goes into data centers? And I read somewhere last week that a full refresh of a data center is essentially every 10 years now. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know. Maybe you could tell us. But moving from Matt's point is you've got all these suppliers in who are trying to create or strive to get to the 2030, 2040 net zero target. How do you contribute to that process? What do you do to help the data center operators get?
Well, I think the first point to make is that the waste and the input should be the same thing. And that's part of what the research that we are involved with is looking at. So yes, repurposing hardware cuts down, ultimately you would hope, on the energy involved in manufacturing new hardware. And that's the ultimate aim. But as part of that, you need, if you're looking at the circular economy, you need to develop new ways of designing equipment so that it can be remade and reused and repurposed for as long as possible, which cuts down on your materials use and your carbon use in manufacture. But it also allows time for recycling technologies to catch up. So at the moment, you're looking at an estate that's full of carbon-heavy materials to manufacture and critical raw materials which cannot currently be recovered, which is unsustainable. There are recycling technologies that are advancing to help with that, for example, bio-leaching, but they're nowhere near where they need to be. So as an industry, I guess, what we've been trying to work with other industry stakeholders like recyclers, like academics, like to a certain extent the designers and the manufacturers, to try and prolong that life cycle as long as possible, to try and give us an alternative way of working our IT hardware, which is circular economy essentially. So that's what's happening on the IT side. There are research projects that are underway at the moment, they're early stages, and I've just found out that there are also research projects that are looking at building circular economy on concrete that are being given funding by the UK government at the moment. That's something that TechBio is doing. That's just kind of gives you a way of the idea.
And can you give us an idea of the, the repurposing process in terms of by 2030, do you see there is still a market for X data center equipment? Is that going to decrease because of the longevity of new equipment coming through, the circular economy that they're repurposing essentially within their own organizations as opposed to selling it onto the open market?
I would hope not, because I think that different data centers operate different levels of processing power. And the high-end ones will need different technology to other people in the industry and data processing needs. And so it may well be passed on to other users. And the longer you can make that viable, the longer that equipment will last. Personally, I hope that it actually becomes more widespread, because if it becomes more widespread, it means that people are being smarter about the way that we design this equipment and being more cooperative in the way that we use materials and components in the sector. So to give you an idea, at the moment, equipment comes into our facility from a variety of sources, ex-finance deals, data centers for refreshes, organisations that have overbought equipment, and it's stripped down to component parts. It's restored to factory condition, and then we rebuild it, or we sell it as an upgrade. So it's part of other people's refurbishment, I guess. That's limited at the moment by the number of components on, the number of manufacturers, and the interaction between them. Now we're hoping, not just as a company, but that will change as people become more active and more involved in that way they're hard.
Okay, so what I'm really interested to get my head around is the amount of services that are delivered over data centers are immense. Everyone now understands that they're going to get something from a data center. But what does it mean in terms of the joined up thinking between these suppliers, these new technologies, the data centers discussing with the energy suppliers? I'd like to get a better understanding of where the joined up thinking is and the challenges there are to bring all these suppliers together. Because it seems, well, I think it's pretty obvious that the world is now run by data. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle, as Seamus said.
The world needs to change, Owen. The world and society in general is changing. The way we live has to change. That's basically, and data is part of the solution, as in part of the tools that will help us to change. In isolation, like what Astrid is saying, circular economy, even words like circular economy are only come into our narrative now as citizens in the past couple of years. So we have to learn what that means as citizens. Then and only can we then say, well, what role does data play? The other thing that I'd say very clearly, and I think Matt and Seamus would agree with me, I hope, is that the center that holds data isn't just one industry. It's maybe 3, 4, or 5 industries. It's a real estate industry. It's an ICT industry. It's a data industry. It's an interconnect industry. It's a telco industry. In the same way as a retail Dundrum shopping centre isn't just a shop. It's what we don't do, and as someone who's worked on the industry, and I said it many times, I was the worst engineer that God ever put on this planet but I actually worked on my communication skills. People in technical industries are not very good at communicating because they actually are so technical on stuff that they think the world understands what they're talking about. And to Seamus's point earlier about finding a word like a center for data, you know, they should be called cloud centers maybe, because we get asked regularly globally, oh, you know, these data centers, they're just going to go away, you know, when the cloud takes over. Now, to me, what that's telling us isn't the person who's saying it has a challenge. It's that we, or us, are not communicating correctly. So, you know, there's some definitions that probably the industry need to work on, like anything smart. The world is run by smart thermostats, smart cars, smart grids. All that is data grids, data thermostats, data. Anything smart is just data. So, you know, when we talk language like what Seamus is endeavoring to talk about and Matt is endeavoring to talk about, is we're now trying to give a language to people to tangibly say, oh, so when I use my thermostat at home and I save energy, really, that's data from a center. Because that connection is not there at all. When I use in my business, like Uber, like Seamus says, I use Uber to be efficient and not have cars for my staff. Oh, an on-demand service, which reduces more cars, less cars being made, more cars on demand, food chains and all the rest, less energy in the car being used. Oh, not really Uber smart data. So we need to start using words like that, and then we'll start to get more understanding within the greater community as why do we need these things? They don't employ that many people. Well, in actual fact, more than likely they employ a little bit of everybody now. That's the reality.
Yeah, maybe, gentlemen, you can pick up on that in terms of your own. How do you explain this to the wider market? You've obviously got intimate relationships with your suppliers and your key customers, but do you see your role as going out proselytizing, you know, the benefits that you're looking at this the wrong way around? We're not big energy guzzlers. We're actually in a position to reduce everyone's carbon emissions.
So I have a couple of things to say on that, but I think Astrid, did you want to say something there, or saw you put your?
No,
Sorry, I missed that.
I was thinking on the data side of it, you know, given what Gary was saying and what you were saying earlier, Seamus, I think that this industry is full of people who care about measuring what's actually happening and what's going on. That's what it's, you know, filled with the expertise to do that. And I think it does. And I think that everybody's working on their own part of that. And conversations like this bring that all together. So I think that in that respect, it's quite an interesting sector to be working in.
I want building on what Gary was saying. Personally, I really welcome the pressure and oversight to demonstrate that you are doing something to try and make our business more sustainable and better for the environment, and progressing as fast as is really possible to a zero carbon footprint for our business. I welcome that. I don't necessarily welcome some of the shorthand false narratives and stuff, but that's life, you know. So yeah. I actually do welcome that. You know, I've got kids, and hopefully I'll have grandkids not too soon. But
how do you know?
Yeah, but I hope, like, I'm personally motivated to leave them a better environment, you know, than we had. So the question is not to attack other industries. I think of other industries with carbon emissions, and you know, I don't think they're bad. It's like, do we need transport? Yeah, sure, we need transport. It's not, don't attack that industry. Ask, how can you make a more sustainable and carbon neutral or net zero effect to the environment from your business? And I think that's what you're getting from electricity. But you know, remember, electricity for cars, you know, has the same challenge that we do. You know, let's make that power generation carbon neutral. I really think green energy is important. They come with their nuances. You know, Ireland can produce more wind energy than we'll ever need by multiple factors, no matter what our expansion is. But it takes time. So then your question was, how do we, you know, work with partners and have joined up thinking? The key question is, we can't switch tomorrow to something. There's no magic. So how do we manage a transition in the future and make it as quick and as fast as possible? So we certainly talk to, you know, as many stakeholders as we can. It's in our interest to get there as fast as possible. The guarantee that we make, certainly that the company I work for makes, is we're going to purchase it. You can produce green energy and get it to us, we'll use it. We'll guarantee it, actually, and we'll give you the baseline for investment because we'll guarantee the use, you know, so it's actually a sure thing. But what we don't need is what I'd call Luddites, if you like. If you go back to, there was a lot of people that thought steam engines are bad, you know, and you know what? If I really look back to that age, it wasn't that they were bad, is they implemented it wrong, both from a social context and environmental context. They just did it badly, but it wasn't what they were doing it wrong. So I think I welcome the challenge to, like, you know, move forward with a digital economy, but do it in the most sustainable way possible that improves the environment, not makes it worse. And that's eminently doable. We'll make it more efficient. So at a short-term basis, a lot of the people that I'm talking to that I want to do business with, they're running their IT now. But do you know where they're running it? They're running it in office buildings, warehouses. You can't even measure it. You know, you don't even know what it's doing. The power they're using, it's the same power they use to switch the lights on and, you know, heat the building. You know, it's just not even planned for. What Matt and I do is focus on efficiency, utilization. We're obsessed by things like PUE, the efficiency ratio, and the utilization levels. To just take that IT out of your office, stop expanding it, and put it in the most efficient place you could put it in, that you'll get the best return on your investment for as well, by the way. And we'll try to run that as efficiently as possible and do it in a visible way where we can be challenged.
So picking that point up, Seamus, the challenge, do you think, is there anything, barriers to achieving the success of the targets, whether 2030 or 40? Is there anything or anybody stopping the data center industry getting there? You know, is it demand is going to get too big because as we migrate, you've got greater capacity issues? I understand there's still 8-9% growth in data center capacity in the coming years forecast.
I think the question is getting there, that destination being net zero. That's your question, right, Owen?
Yeah.
I think the key to getting to net zero is to getting to green energy. The air grid target, which is very good, is 70% green energy by 2030. I'd love to see that happen faster. They can't, you know, that can't happen immediately. There's enough projects, wind, solar, and biomass going on in Ireland to make us easily hit that target. I think there's a challenge about getting the grids to be able to take it all and so on. So what do we do in the meantime? In the meantime, companies like Astrid, but also the other infrastructure providers, they're becoming so efficient with their IT gear that even though we might grow at a high percentage, the power required won't grow. That's one thing that's kind of lost. Now, that doesn't get you to net zero, but in the transition, it stops like accelerating. The air grid can shut down coal-fired stations like and bring on an interim better gas solutions while they eventually get to, something like wind power or solar power. So they're the conversations that are happening. So there's nothing in the way of getting there. I don't think it's an execution problem. It's that the technology's there, the investment is there.
Yeah.
It's just how can we make that transition and how can we do it a bit faster? That's like it's bad. There's an approach, there's a plan, and it's pretty strong. If we could do it faster, let's do that.
Yeah, and I think Owen, you said something interesting there, where you talked about increasing capacity. I mean, just to put the growth into perspective, this year across the 5 European major markets, I think we're going to see a 50% increase in take-up, albeit headline signings. Jones Lang and CB published statistics that indicate that by the end of Q3 this year, we'd already seen the same amount of take-up in 2020 as 2019. So you could argue that this pressure to keep meeting demand would somehow dilute your ability to get carbon neutral as quickly as you'd like to. That's not the case. And Seamus said, the supply chain are constantly trying to bring forward innovation. From an operator's point of view, Seamus made the point, we're obsessed with efficiency because a lot of that efficiency is passed on to our customers. So they're obsessed with driving us to efficiency. But one of the key characteristics in the DC market this year is the fact that you're seeing the biggest users of our platforms no longer just accepting off-the-shelf product. We're now having to modify and build the platforms to their optimum designs for the future. And that means that we're being put under a vast amount of pressure. And as Seamus said, it's really welcome pressure to optimize. And I would say we've probably made more design innovation in the first 10, 11 months of this year than we've done in the previous 5. Because of the purchasing power of these big organizations, all of whom have sustainability agendas and they're driving us. Now, our responsibility beyond that is also to acknowledge that cloud doesn't make up all of the business that effectively utilizes our platform. There's still a huge piece around enterprise who do look more to us to deliver product for them because of the smaller scale. So we have to take what we're being driven to by the cloud companies and introduce that across all of our facilities to make sure that we are passing on the efficiencies and driving towards the sustainability goals. The other point, and I really like Seamus's view of this, is that at the end of the day, we're being driven hard by governments, be it through Brussels for Europe, UK, etc., all of whom want us to meet goals. But there is a time and a place to actually remind the governments that it is their responsibility to help us to get to those goals. So, for example, if Europe want us to get to 100% renewable energy by 2030, they need to invest in the infrastructure that we can tap into to enable us to achieve those goals. So it's shared responsibility. And back to the point that we're enabling the world without doubt. We're taking our piece of the responsibility, but we need others to help us get there.
And so that seems to be the main barrier, if there is one, is that knowledge transfer, that people who need to invest really understand the investment. Gary, you mentioned the story of I think was it a politician or someone who said, don't worry about data centers because it's all moving to the cloud. That's a huge disconnect in knowledge.
But there's so much to add to what the two lads have just said, yeah? And there's a great woman that we had a panel with last week, Emma Fryer, well known to everyone. And Emma has been banging this drum for so long, but she can't. On a panel last week, she referenced the International Energy Agency, who have been doing sort of these analyses over the last 10 years as the larger centralized centers have become more prominent. How much more electricity globally have they actually used? And what they've demonstrated to Matt and also to Seamus's point, as they're retiring these localized data centers in everybody's back cupboard into the centralization along with efficiencies, it's 1% of global, yeah? However, we've had 7.5 times more compute for the same input and 12.5 times more traffic going between people, machines, people, etc. But the real thing that Emma highlighted, she said, if that same level of efficiency had been applied to the aviation industry, we will be able to fly across the Atlantic on a teaspoonful of Calpol. So this idea and this concept that when 70%, up to 70% of your operating expense is an input feed of electricity you are not trying to save is nuts, even on a commercial perspective. Then you throw on top of that, you know, our kids are expecting, people are now purchasing and using browsers and products and services based on the little green dot in the Copier Chrome browser. Investors, let's follow the money for a second. The two lads represent very large, very successful listed companies who constantly need to be reinforced and supported by the markets. Yeah? You look at Blackstone, you look at BlackRock, you look at all these guys. They now are changing their dynamics for investing in green. So it trickles all the way down. This word stakeholder I hear all the time. Stakeholders are getting it. All stakeholders. The purchaser, the financer, the operator. You've got tens of thousands of people in Amazon walked out last year because they weren't happy the way the direction of the company were going. It's permeating all aspects of society. Data, though, I get back to, genuinely is one of the greatest tools we have in our disposal to fight what we need to achieve, which is a net zero whatever planet-wise by 2050. And that's the narrative that we need to be feeding into, not sort of specifically the center. I like what Seamus has said, though. A center of data. It may get us out of this discussion, but eventually they'll work out that it was the same as the other thing. But it's words. Words are important. Words are important. And, you know, I'm sure we're going to talk about Ireland a bit later, but, you know, this isn't an industry that's just appeared. This is an industry that has been around in different formats, I guess, since the first microprocessor, right, Seamus? Since mainframes. That was
since the first steam engine, Gary.
Well, I'd even go back further. I remember watching the narrative around the first printing press, and you listen to the noise around it, and obviously up to that point, you had most of the printing material was managed by the church and stuff, because they were doing. And the high priest said the only good that can come out of these printing presses is it'll make monks lazy. Whereas now we realize it just exploded education. It exploded in people's ability to read books. It's a bit like that. And Seamus is right. Where we have change so fundamental, it feeds into the fear. The press feed into that fear, you know, and because we need to have a broader discussion.
Well, Gary, mate, it's a good point, because I only caught the headline this morning in the one of the business publications in Dublin saying, you know, that data centers were going to have to produce their own energy because by 2025 they're going to use 29% of Irish energy in total. Now I didn't read the whole article. I just saw the headline. And of course, headlines can be very damaging, because I then go and tell that story to a member of the family, and then they tell it, and then it's Chinese whispers, and before you know it, data centers are ruining the planet, destroying Ireland, and It's not the farmers.
Let me
So
on that.
how do you get this? What are the communication responsibilities of the data center industry in Ireland?
Can I comment a bit, Gary, on that one? Because I'm kind of interested in it. Part of the narrative in Ireland, particularly, as opposed to carbon and data centers and the digital economy globally, but in Ireland specifically, because I was educated and grew up here, and there's a couple of things. One is the real argument in Ireland is certainly about the environment, without a question. But it's almost cognitive dissonance between the success of the Irish economy to attract foreign direct investment, which translates into employment, with a negative connotation that but that very success is damaging the environment. There's two parts to this. One is the perception data centers don't provide employment. Let's face up to that. That's what I hear in the press a lot, or friends and family. And compared with a factory making microchips that employs a few thousand, uses energy, it's true directly, but indirectly, data centers are driving businesses that employ tens of thousands of people in Ireland, tens of thousands, if significantly more actually. At a personal level, when I took my business studies class for my leaving cert, the equivalent of A levels for folks in the UK, that the geographical analysis for business in Ireland was agriculture needed to stay at a very high proportion because we were geographically disadvantaged to being an island. Your supply chains could never be cost effective enough. That was actually the narrative when I was in school. And that dissipated, when you see a factory like Intel or pharmaceuticals, whatever, so value goods that aren't bulk and so on, you can do. But now with the data economy, the digital economy, geography is actually to our advantage. We are the closest point from the East Coast of the United States for data to access Europe. And there's some great companies that employ a lot of people in Ireland that build those cables that land in Killala because it's the shortest part of the continental shelf to mainland Europe. Mainland Europe, Ireland as part of Europe. The connectivity between the UK, France, and Ireland, the loops between Dublin and Amsterdam, they're massive. There's no geography. That's transformed the business environment in Ireland already. Frankly, as an Irish person living in Ireland, that's why I love this industry. And we're facilitating a whole new wave when you look forward rather than backwards. And I'm speaking here for Ireland as a country specifically, massively to this economy's advantage, to the employment of our young people, and to the growth of the wealth of the country as part of the European Union. It's only an advantage. Now, when you look at it in its very narrow sense, you can say, well, if that industry uses this much power and employs this many people directly, that doesn't seem good enough. But that's not really the case. The digital economy is what will transform Ireland in the long run. All the other aspects of our economy are hugely important. Don't get me, I'm not putting down anybody else. But digital technology enables every industry and will want to help them locate here and trade and partner in data as well as their own services with the rest of Europe and the United States, frankly, from our geographic advantage.
Owen, we've had 6 decades now of being recognized as a digital ICT gateway to Europe for foreign direct investments. 6 decades, right? But more so than ever, it's become less tangible, physical, because that's how data in the world has gone. Why do I say that? 20 years ago, exactly this year, the OECD recognized Ireland as the largest exporter of software, bar none, in the world. Bar none. Why? Because we were localizing software. We were taking software from the large US companies, localizing it here, changing it to languages that were everything from Hebrew to Swahili to German to everything, putting them onto floppy disks or CD-ROMs, putting them into a box, physically putting them into 40-foot containers and flooding them out all over Europe. It was tangible. You know, we nearly had national days of celebration when the 40-foot containers were leaving the P&O ferries, right? But nearly to the day that we were announced as the largest exporter of software in the world, which was tangible, 4,000 people in Microsoft working, packing boxes, Oracle, Informix, great. We moved to the cloud, or we moved to a more tangible, less tangible form of medium. The advent of the center that holds the data that used to be on the floppy disks. But what also happened, which is much more to what Seamus is saying, is when Microsoft had 3,000 people in Sandyford, they had the localization people working on the stuff here, and the warehouse was beside it. But you only ever saw 3,000 people working for Microsoft, right? But there was only about 40 people in the warehouse, yeah? Packing the boxes into the 40 and shipping off. So with the last 20 years, the production and the warehouse is separated. This being the warehouse, i.e. the data center, this here being the campus in Sandyford, thousands of people, now at 8,000. So actually, if people want to relate back what a data center is, it's just the warehouse part of the 4,500 people that used to work for Microsoft. But guess what now? To Seamus's point, there's 6,500 people working in Microsoft. More people than the manual jobs of putting floppy disks. And ultimately, and this is our greatest frustration, I haven't seen yesterday's report, but I'd suggest there was no mention whatsoever about what goes on in the center. It's our largest export. ICT-related services are 120 billion out of Ireland. It's it and pharmaceuticals kept our exports in the green this year. So we talk a lot about our biggest challenge is to maintain that industry whilst hitting net 70% on renewables by 2030. Those two, to Seamus's point, those two are our objectives. We cannot allow that industry that has taken us 60 years to become a recognized tier one to fall off a cliff, because that's real, tangible jobs. We need to marry the two and work our way through it. But
so Astrid.
I'm listening to what you're saying. I find it fascinating. I'm also wondering about what energy the industry saves at a larger level and what emissions it saves at a larger level. So we sit on the local district climate change coalition, and we see a lot of statistics about what is our greatest use of carbon in the area, and it's transport. I live in Paisley Bridge, which is just outside Harrogate, so we're looking at a town and a country model. We can't really get away from not using carbon with tractors at the minute. But it sounds like this transition to a data centre into this sort of virtual model and reducing tangible assets, it sounds like data is actually driving decarbonisation in other areas massively. So I'm wondering whether there has been any work done, any statistics assessed on what your carbon savings as an industry are for the rest of the economy and the rest of the country.
The International Energy Association, the same report I mentioned, did all the same reports for the dematerialization of the planet. So let's think for a second, we're sitting at a desk 20 years ago. We've calendars, we've got calculators, we've got a big, huge computer, we've got books, we've got a whole... Now you actually have it on this little lad here. Right? So they have actually done that whole, but that's forgotten about, obviously, because that doesn't feed the narrative of negativity associated with change. To your exact point.
Here's what I found online.
Well, there's my assistant is telling me what she found online. And she told me to shut up. Actually, that's what she told me. But this is a great discussion, because what we're talking about now is the data, the value of the data in a global perspective and also on a national perspective. And I like what Matt and Seamus has also said is about the reason that we have hosts in Ireland at all is that we're trying to we're trying to be a co-opetition. Every quarter we published the numbers. Every quarter. Every half year we publish the numbers. They never get referenced. They never get referenced. There's nobody hiding. This is an industry that is part of the foreign direct investment fabric of Ireland. In the same way as pharmaceuticals, life sciences, finance. So when we get thrown, oh, it's not acceptable to have X% of our electricity used for data centers, we then have to say why. You know, Ireland is the largest exporter and manufacturer of Viagra in the world. We've only 5 million people, and we're chucking out, 5 million a month? Now, if you didn't know the facts, that could lead you to do something else other than it is a very large part of our exports. So in isolation, everything can feed a narrative. It's just unfortunately at the narrative. During change, people forget about the opportunity. And we're just at the stage now where we're not teaching enough people about the opportunity.
Gary, because we're coming up to the hour now. I'm conscious of everyone's time, the listeners and your good selves. To pick up that point, in fact, Seamus, you mentioned right at the beginning of the discussions about data solving solutions, and we've now got potentially a vaccine that is going to start the whole recovery of the world process, and many others are going to be coming out. I'm interested to go around the panel and just get your thoughts on a post-COVID world where the data center industry has reacted and is going, and some of the new challenges that may have come out of this very dark period for the world. Matt, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So hopefully you can hear me. There we go.
Yep.
So I'll just comment on one thing, if that's okay. So I think what's really helped us through the pandemic has been the level of awareness that's been promoted by people like Gary, for example, but Emma Fryer, who Gary talked about, and it was just in time, in the sense that governments just in time were made aware of just how essential the data center industry is to enabling people to effectively keep going during the pandemic, and in fact pivot towards activities which ultimately are core to the sustainability agenda of the planet. So one of the biggest challenges we have is ensuring that we remain viewed as essential and really walk the tightrope between being viewed as essential versus critical national infrastructure, because of the level of regulation leading to a level of inflexibility that may come with that, whether it be capital inflows and outflows to the industry, or whether it will be more stringent demands towards moving towards delivery on agendas that are just too fast. So that's just one point I make. So I'm thanking all the governments on one hand and saying on the other hand, I hope we haven't put our head too far above the parapet.
Anyone else there?
What was the question?
Well, it was post-COVID world. How do is there anything that you see, new challenges? How are we going to spring out of it as an industry, or is it business as usual? The
greatest word that we could possibly all get behind is we're going to enter a hybrid decade. It's going to be a hybrid of all sorts. Hybrid working from everywhere, a hybrid on ICT, a hybrid of our car, a hybrid. We're transitioning away from the norms, and maybe this horrible disease that we've all had to inflict for the last has woken us up to the fact, because all it has done, and Seamus and Matt have the numbers, it's just accelerated. It hasn't started a lot of what's happening. It's accelerated faster in some industries than others. Seamus, I'm sure, has examples already from.
Sorry? No, I was just about to say that we looked at the data from the London Internet Exchange at the beginning of COVID, and data traffic jumped the equivalent of what it would have done in an entire year in the space of about 2 weeks because of provisioning for COVID, and everybody had to go and work from home, and it did it, which is impressive. I'm really interested to see what the carbon outputs were over that period with all our reduction of traffic, and I would really like to see somebody do a comparison between the two, because yeah, we had a huge amount more energy running through our data centres, but how does that compare to the miles that we would have driven if we'd have left it as business as usual? And I think that's quite a hopeful message. If we can talk about that and understand that and pull that apart, it might give us some lessons for the future.
The stats that Astrid just brought up there are amazing. I can tell you that certainly my team here in Ireland, but my colleagues across Europe, the effect of their work because of those statistics were massive network expansions to take the capacity, and significant pressure for those teams to make sure nothing went down. They managed all that, but the post-COVID world, I got to admit, besides the technology we're talking about, is mental health, stress. There's no normal, so there's no going back to normal. Whatever it is, it'll be new, and there's going to be a lot of work, not just for us, but I think in every work environment, just managing, how to have personal relationships, that meetings aren't just Zoom. Transport is important. People are going to have to start meeting again. But, the challenge would be, I think, as Astrid pointed out, it's going to be super to look at the carbon emission and statistics from 2020 going next year. When we start looking at that, what changed? I think it's going to be very informative. And might surprise a lot of people. But doesn't mean that nobody's ever going to fly in an airplane again, but maybe we'll have a different view of how we do that sustainably, and maybe remote working will be used in a different way. So I don't think just going back to normal. I just think what's the correct way across various industry sectors, including ours, to move forward. And I do think sustainability from the statistics we learned about this year are going to be extremely informative to make real fact-based decisions to get carbon emissions down.
Yeah, and also potentially greater understanding of other sectors. The data industry has been pushed to the forefront now, and everybody knows that they need it. So it's a question of how you integrate that into the rest of what's going on and how you communicate on that.
Panel, as you can tell, we could go on for an awfully long time. This is a huge subject, broad subject, but if you've got time, I would just like to bring in some questions from our viewers this morning. Brian has asked, do data centers need to move outside the M50 to gain better acceptance from the general public and facilitate regional enterprise development? So I guess, Matt, Seamus, that's for you. And Gary.
Let me give a crack at this, right? Data centers and the data that resides in the centers is just another form of foreign direct investment. And we have a cluster. The optimum cluster location for those centers in Ireland right now is in the greater metro Dublin area, i.e. Dublin and the adjoining counties. So the same dynamics that are for clustering, most important word, clustering, apply to the data center industry, as does the pharmaceutical industry in Cork, the life sciences industry in Galway, and the financial services industry in the IFSC in Dublin. So you can't just, it'd be like saying to Cork, let's decentralize all the pharmaceuticals out of Cork. It's not that easy. Universities are set up for it. You know, the dynamics of it, all that type of stuff. But what's most important that most people, in my opinion, don't understand, and it goes back, and I'm sorry for boring everybody, to data. The centres hold data. The data for Ireland, like other forms of foreign direct investment, 99% of it somehow is exported. And the market that it's being exported to and from is the Europe. So without all that infrastructure, which you don't see, 220 telecoms providers, fiber optic cables that are being distributed diversely and redundantly off the eastern seaboard, around the UK, over to the US. If you understand data, you will then start to get an appreciation for why it is not as easy as buying cheaper land and running cheaper connection power in a geographic area. If it was, and if we could, they would. Do you really think that industry would go through this pain if it was an alternative? And I let the boys talk next. And always remember, it's not unique to Ireland. When we look at geographies, we don't even talk countries, we talk FLAD. Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Dublin. We don't talk Germany thing. It's the infrastructure, that the technology underneath that you don't see. So in the medium term, unless significant infrastructure investment on the telco happens, it's going to be a challenge. Seamus?
I mean, what you said answers the question. I'm kind of thinking of the question behind the question, which is always dangerous. I don't know Brian and what he does, but perhaps Brian is asking, can we take, maybe not an environmental question, you're probably asking, can we take employment elsewhere outside the Dublin metro area? And could do, but think about what we said earlier in, you know, if it makes sense, for example, the pharma, or in Galway, the medical device cluster, you know, if our data center services and connectivity services, we had to be there, we would be there. But you can see, you know, they're probably better served to grow their businesses with data centers as a cluster around. You know, actually, it's just outside the M50. The question, actually, in the city. Well, there's a few, but
Dublin Metro, yeah.
The so you know, it's not, if it was necessary for the businesses that our industries support, of course we'd be there.
You know, it's a great
really
point. You bring up one of the points that hasn't been discussed at all, which is one of the other dividends to Ireland of centres, and that's the export of skills and services. Because of the 60 years of ICT and the Intel learnings and the Pfizer learnings, the Irish data centre designers, builders, operators, etc., Matt will talk about this, they're held in such high esteem around Europe. I come from the 80s when we exported, me and everybody else, and probably Seamus, and we weren't coming back. Now we're exporting people and skills and services. And to Brian's question, they're not all Dublin companies. There's a lot of Limerick companies. There's a lot of Waterford companies. There's a lot of Cork companies. There's also an awful lot of Donegal manufacturing companies, Louth manufacturing companies, supporting products and services to the industry that's been exported. And if and when the capacity for data centres in Ireland, if and when we stop building and we start refurbishing, that's what'll long tail last, because Europe is huge. Ireland is just one of the main clusters. So I think the job and economic dividends to Ireland are secondary, tertiary, and also even bigger than that. And Matt, maybe that's a good link into how highly the Irish, if hopefully you do feel, are held in around Europe in their design skills, and they're not all from Dublin, obviously.
Hey, you're making me feel jealous that I don't have an Irish passport.
Hey, listen, man.
I mean, I'll say something that's going to sound flippant, but it's not. You know, when I think, you know, we've got one of the biggest expansion programs of the publicly quoted US data center companies in Europe, and I can honestly tell you, it's not just in terms of our direct supply chain, but I look at the customers and their supply chains around commercial, around design, around construction, and particularly around operations. Nearly all of the senior people, and indeed down through the supply chain, either have Irish accents or they have Irish names. And I'm sorry, that's fact. It doesn't matter what country I'm in. And you know, the depth of their expertise and the fact that they're effectively, you know, employed and trained in Ireland and then exported through Europe. And it's remained so during the pandemic, even with the challenges of mobility back and forth to their families. It's maintained. And so, you know, it sounds flippant, but yeah, I am jealous I haven't got an Irish passport.
There's also another link, Owen, which Seamus also mentioned, the success, and it is a success that David Connolly and the Irish Wind Energy have achieved 40%, I think, this year in renewable energy. But what's really encouraging is that Ireland's association with renewable energy is changing, and now they've got community projects where communities now are actually getting a dividend associated with some of the profits or whatever it might be from the wind in their region. So, you know, the more renewable energy that Ireland's able to harvest, the more it can turn that renewable electricity into very valuable, as we said already, data that can be then exported as green data to feed into the 120 billion. It's a food chain. It's a food chain. That's exactly how we should look at it, as the green electrons feed into green centers that create data that are monetized, valued, and exported. And then we bring it back, and we're also exporting people. And I'm not sure all that gets communicated because it's new. It's new, but we're not new. Seamus, Matt, myself, and others here, we've been in and around data from punch cards to floppy disks, I guess. This is just the latest manifestation, and it sounds flippant, and I certainly don't want for any of the audience or the press that are on this call to take it otherwise. These are challenges of success. Genuinely. These are challenges of success. Whether we actually achieve what we need to achieve and decarbonize the electron, that's the challenge. But remember, this is a challenge of success, not scratching our heads wondering, oh my goodness, I hope we can, like some other geographic areas, have the opposite. They've more green electrons than they know what to do with, and they can't attract the same level of data. So once we look at it like that, it becomes a different story, right? I think.
Well, I think, panel, that's actually a great place maybe to wind up our discussion this morning, because it's on a very optimistic, positive note, Gary. My takeaway from this is that there is a huge amount happening in the Irish economy centered around the data that it hosts. It's offering enormous growth opportunities for the economy, the much wider economy, whether you're a farmer or whether you're a construction worker, it doesn't matter. The future of Ireland's economy is the center is the data. It does appear that we've still got a big disconnect between public perception and reality. It seems we could do a lot more to communicate this opportunity. It's I know most people live in silos because they got their own place of work and their own thoughts, but this surely is a great story to get out and get people to understand and tell their children. Seamus, your grandkids, when they come along, I'm sure are going to be very proud of what you and all of you have done for the island of Ireland. So unless there's any burning comments to make.
I'd love Seamus to finish off with a little learning he gave me last week about a philosopher from the 1700s, about some syndrome or something. Just remind people about, because if you want to see the future, we can't see it, but you can learn from the past, right? So Seamus, I loved it. I bought his book, but go on.
He's putting me on the spot here. Yeah. There's a German philosopher called Schopenhauer, and he defined truth. And there's 3 stages to truth. The first one is resistance. You know, that's a stupid idea. It'll never work. You know, the second one is ridicule. It's like, you know what, it's a good idea, but it's not practical. You can never do it. And you know what, you're stupid for even thinking about it. And the third stage in success is self-evidence. When something is self-evidence, it's presented to present your ideas, basically presented back to you as, you know what, why didn't you move faster? It was a great idea. I told you to do that years ago. What took you so long? And to me, rural electrification is exactly that. It's a bad idea. What are you building those pylons for? Well, yeah, okay, it's a good idea, but it's not worth it. To now, who questions it? That's where we're going to be at the end of the decade. It's like the digital economy will be self-evident, and people will be asking me and Matt, why were you so slow? You know.
I think that's a great way to finish. Honest to God, it's beauty.
It certainly is, panel. I'd just like to thank Astrid, Matt, Seamus, and Gary for your energy, your insight, and your thoughts. And wishing you a very good day. And to everyone that's listening, and I'm sorry that we couldn't cover more of the questions, but looking at the comments, it's been a very positive feedback from the people who have been tuning in this morning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Owen. Well done. Thank you.
And on behalf of Data Centers Ireland, I'd just like to say thank you to the panel as well. I found that fascinating. And there are more discussions like this throughout the week. So please go and visit datacenters-island.com and you can see the full program. Thank you all very much, panel. Cheers.
All right. Good luck, everyone. Bye now.
Enjoy yourself. Bye.